Hello my friends, and welcome back for another Laurel and Hardy feature film ranking. In the last video we talked about the confused Utopia, or Atoll K, or Robinson Crusoe Land. It had a very difficult production, and the result is a strange movie that doesn't quite match up the way it should. We talked about Nothing But Trouble, which has a clever plot and a great villain, but is let down by a lack of really clever gags and just kind of feels like Laurel and Hardy on autopilot more than anything else. And we talked about The Dancing Masters, which despite supporting performances by Robert Mitchum and Margaret Dumont, is left with kind of a confused, meandering script that repurposes too many old jokes ineffectively. But it does still have some clever parts, even though a big comic set piece for the ending proves to be a big letdown. But The Dancing Masters, certainly watchable, as all of their feature films are watchable. In the comments section of the last video, I asked you to name some of your favorite Laurel and Hardy movies. I got some amazing answers there. Classics like Way Out West, Sons of the Desert, and Blockheads, and we'll be talking about all those, not today, but further down the road. For today, in the comments, you can talk about some of your favorite or least favorite Laurel and Hardy films, or just talk about a franchise or a comedy team where there's something in it that just doesn't quite work for you. Maybe you like a particular band, but there's one album that just doesn't quite work. So comment below with some of the outliers and oddballs that you find in some of your favorite franchises, and let's jump into my Laurel and Hardy ranking. I'll also remind everybody these are just my opinions. I watched all of the feature films through and put them in the order that I think best suits them from worst to best, but if you happen to like one that I don't enjoy, or you enjoy one that I don't care for, that's perfectly fine. We can get some good discourse going in the comments. Let's jump in now with my next pick. Next up on our list, a cut above the previous mentioned titles there, we have from 1943, Jitterbugs. Jitterbugs was famously a favorite film of Ollie himself. Jitterbugs doesn't really feel like a Laurel and Hardy film to me. It could very easily have had any other two actors, or even cut it down to one actor, to take sort of the leading part. Stan and Ollie accidentally become embroiled in a scam to sell fake gasoline-generating pills, and a con artist, played by Bob Bailey, enlists their two-man Zoot Suit band, where they both play multiple instruments at the same time with these sort of Rube Goldberg kind of gadgets, to help him peddle these fake pills, that kind of thing. Of course, that doesn't go so well when they play a fairground and someone's car explodes due to using one of them. But it is very believable that Stan and Ollie would accidentally be used to peddle a fraudulent product without even realizing it's all a scam. But then that quickly shifts to them trying to help an heiress who's been cheated out of her money by a pair of con artists try to get her money back, and it involves Oliver going undercover as Colonel Watterson Bixby, this fine southern gentleman, and Stanley getting a chance to play a couple different parts, including Aunt Emily and the butler, Potts. P-O-Otts, Potts. There are some good gags, nothing big, nothing that's a standout. Jitterbugs to me, again, doesn't really feel like a Laurel and Hardy movie per se, and apparently Fox had dug around and pulled out scripts and ideas from a decade previously. There was a movie from the early 30s, I think, called Arizona to Broadway or something very similar, that's kind of the same general idea, but they reworked a little bit to accommodate Stan and Ollie and kind of update it for the time. But Jitterbugs doesn't quite strike a chord. That being said, though, I still think it's a good film. Indeed, I put it lower than I think most other people would put it in their Laurel and Hardy rankings and assessments. One thing that does turn some people off is actually a foible, maybe not a foible, but certainly a feature, that we see in some of their earliest work from the 20s, and that is Stan and Ollie don't spend the whole movie in character as Stan and Ollie. In this case, they get a chance to don several disguises, as I mentioned before, and play alternate characters. I like this. It's a good change of pace and a good chance for them to really act. But I can see why, if you're looking for a very conventional, straightforward Laurel and Hardy comedy, probably not quite what you would want from your Laurel and Hardy film. Again, too, the lack of any big gags or comic set pieces is a little bit of a problem. There is some World War II commentary, as there is in all of their 1940s films. In this case, the booklet for Jitterbugs talks a lot about the difficulties behind the scenes due to war rationing. How there were supposed to be, 50 jitterbugging couples at this big dance at the fair, and that had to just be made smaller and smaller and smaller due to shoe rationing. And additionally, many of the male dancers were conscripted into the U.S. Army or other branches of the military as well, so that was kind of a casting problem. The movie that Jitterbugs made me think of last time I watched it in preparation for this was The Sting. If you can imagine The Sting with kind of a simplified plot, without any of the snappy dialogue, and without any of the plot twists, you'd have something kind of similar, because Jitterbugs, I guess, plays almost in some ways like an extended episode of the 1950s TV show Rocket Squad, starring Reed Hadley, in that it's all about Laurel and Hardy trying to uncover this con game, out-swindle the swindlers, that sort of stuff. Bob Bailey does a pretty good job. He acted with them in The Dancing Masters as well. And Vivian Blaine as the leading lady. Very, very appealing. She has one of my favorite musical parts in their films when she sings "The Moon Kissed the Mississippi last night." A highlight, I think, of all the non-Laurel and Hardy musical numbers in their films. That one's probably my favorite. She's a beautiful singing voice. Lee Patrick pops up briefly for a funny scene where she's supposed to seduce Ollie. She's not really given enough to do, though, but does make for some good gags. At the end of the day, Jitterbugs is solid. The plot's a little convoluted in places because it shifts gears a few times, and it could definitely have used kind of a bigger, I think, repertoire of jokes. I'm surprised they didn't dig too much out from their silent and early sound films as they usually did in these films. Maybe that was to give it something of a different personality, but I think if they'd done something a little more typical for Laurel and Hardy, I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. But it's definitely watchable, definitely a lot of fun. And I think Jitterbugs, if you're looking for maybe a Laurel and Hardy film that's a tad different, that'd be the way to go. So you could put on your zoot suit and give that a try. In much the same way that I'm not a big fan of Jitterbugs, as it doesn't feel like a Laurel and Hardy vehicle, The Big Noise rubs some people the wrong way because it feels like a very derivative Laurel and Hardy vehicle. They take a lot of gags from their earlier films and redo them for this feature. For example, the train gag from Birthmarks, one of their early sound films, where they have to climb up and try to sleep together in the berth of a moving train. Here it's redone pretty well, but then there are other kind of random ones too, like a woman in kind of a trance state sneaking around trying to murder Oliver, taken from their short film Oliver the Eighth, is also redone here somewhat randomly and strangely, and it doesn't quite work. And I know, again, this abundance of reused gags definitely turns some people off when it comes to The Big Noise. And to be honest, The Big Noise doesn't have many fans irregardless. You might remember, if you read the Medved brothers' list of the 50 worst films ever made back in the 70s, The Big Noise made the list, being dismissed as a tired, redundant comedy. And admittedly, with all those reused gags, there are definitely some elements of that. But The Big Noise has a lot of strengths too, and I'm kind of surprised that more people can't find at least something to enjoy in it. It has a very good cast. Arthur Space pops up as a crackpot inventor. He made his super bomb, The Big Noise, as well as a dud duplicate that he can use like for demonstration or display, and tasks Stan Ollie with helping him to protect it from enemy agents. In this case, the enemy agents are purely domestic, but they're willing to sell the bomb to the Nazis, one of whom, played by Phil Van Zandt, popped up as kind of a fun comic heavy in several Three Stooges shorts in the 40s and 50s, so it's good they have a strong cast there. We have Bob Dudley and Esther Howard, and a very young Robert Blake pops up long before In Cold Blood or Beretta or anything like that as a child actor, and he has some really funny bits and does a good job. And I was pretty impressed with the cast overall. Although those recycled gags are a bit tiresome, most of them do manage to fit at least somewhat organically into the story. And Stan and Ollie do get some good kind of one-off comedy bits too. As they're playing cards and a gunman walks in, get 'em up, and they throw their cards in the air. There's some craziness involving revolving furniture that slides in and out of the floors and walls. Of course, they get some comedy mileage out of that. Stanley has a concertina that's used repeatedly for various gags, including a very surreal one involving dancing fish at the end that I think you're either going to love or hate. But The Big Noise, despite being just, a quick hour 5 or hour 10 minute, I should say, comedy, I think does deliver on laughs, and it does feel a lot like a traditional Laurel and Hardy film. Is it perfect? No. Again, it is kind of tired and creaky in places. And some of the characters, especially near the beginning of the film that are introduced, such as Mr. Hartley's neighbors, don't really play a big part in the movie either. I think they could have streamlined the cast a little bit, make it flow a little smoother. Oh, an hour 14 minutes, excuse me. But anyway, yeah, The Big Noise, not great, but not terrible either. I put it in Jitterbugs, about level pegging, above the ones we talked about in the last video, but not really classics, just kind of fun diversions. Let's look at the first film on my ranking from their Hal Roach Studios period, shall we? In part 1 of this series, I asked you to comment your favorite Laurel and Hardy movies below. And so many classics like Sons of the Desert, Way Out West, popped up in that comment section. I was so happy to see them, and we will be getting to those movies a little while from now. Those films, however, were made at Hal Roach Studios, where Stan and Ollie worked from the 20s up through 1940, and that's where so many classic, both short and feature films were made. I say it because I think there was only one big misstep, one big hiccup in their feature film filmography at Roach, and that's 1938's Swiss Miss, not to be confused with the hot cocoa of the same name. Swiss Miss is a fun movie. It's an opera, or at least opera-related film, which is not uncommon for Laurel and Hardy. We'll be talking about The Bohemian Girl and Babes in Toyland and all sorts of other opera-based Laurel and Hardy adventures down the road, so that's not inherently a bad thing. But Swiss Miss had great difficulty behind the scenes. Stan Laurel was sick and kind of stepped back from the creative control he usually had, which resulted in the film being kind of re-edited and taken in different directions. And it shows, because Swiss Miss is a very generic, kind of dull plot, and there are some loose ends and bizarre things that don't quite work out. Stan and Ollie travel to Switzerland to sell mouse traps, believing that where there's cheese, there will be mice. And the owner of the cheese factory that they visit gives them counterfeit money, a huge bill, that's all, a Bulvanian franc, I should say. And when they try to spend it, of course, they end up being forced to work at the hotel to pay for the elaborate meal and everything that they ordered. So kind of a bizarre plot right off the bat. This is further compounded by a famous opera composer traveling to the hotel to work on his masterpiece. His wife, who is a very important opera singing star, played here by Della Lind, pops up as well, try to get her husband back because he feels like her career has overshadowed his. And so we have this kind of a Star is Born sort of subplot going on. And Stan and Ollie don't really have much to do with this subplot, which is even more frustrating because the composer is played by Walter Wolf King. We talked about him in villain roles in A Night at the Opera, where he played Rudolfo Laspari, as well as in the Marx Brothers Go West, where he played one of the two villains teamed with Robert Barrett and did a really good job in both of those. He bounces off the Marx Brothers really well. He's not given a chance to do the same with Laurel and Hardy. I do like seeing him in kind of the juvenile male lead as opposed to a villain part, but at the end of the day it's like, oh man, they could have given him more to do. Della Lind is okay, and she has more interaction with Stan and Ollie. Indeed, Ollie kind of falls in love with her, and the scene where he serenades her with "Let me call you sweetheart" is probably the highlight of the movie, probably the one bit everybody really remembers. Very good musical bit as well. The other songs are okay. They're all kind of played more for laughs and silliness. There's the cricket song, there's a I Can't Get Over the Alps, that kind of thing. There's a song about yodeling, of course. They're not terrible, they're not really great either. And then, weirdly enough, there was apparently a song Stan and Ollie were going to do with Charles Joodles, playing the cheese factory proprietor, and they cut all but a few lyrics, so this song kind of, a piece of a song I should say, just kind of pops out of nowhere and then disappears again. Very, very weird. And again, one of those kind of post-production choices that didn't do the film too many favors. On the other hand, though, despite a good cast, they also underuse Eric Blore, who we remember today mostly for his work with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. A very funny actor. He gets really next to nothing to do with Stan Ollie. And Charles Gamora, the actor who specialized in playing apes and other kind of simian creatures. He kind of shows up randomly too. A gorilla attacks Laurel and Hardy on a rope bridge and wrecks their piano and that sort of thing. And apparently the piano was going to be a much bigger piece of the film, but that kind of got cut down. Forgive me, there's a rainstorm going on, so bear with the rain. We're almost done for today. But Swiss Miss, you know, good ideas and a good cast, not really coming to fruition. I will say though, there's still some great Laurel and Hardy iconic gags. Stanley pretending to be in need of brandy to get a St. Bernard to let him drink is a highlight. As is a bit with bubbles falling into the, or I should say water falling into the organ, which causes it to produce bubbles every time it's played. Some really fun animation there. But at the end of the day, Swiss Miss just feels like the bare minimum, kind of by the numbers. It doesn't have that creative spark that we see in Sons of the Desert or Way Out West or most of their other Hal Roach films. So I put it at the bottom of their Hal Roach movies and in the kind of second from the bottom tier of their features overall. So if you've seen any of these, please comment your thoughts below. Again, I apologize for the rainstorm. I have no control over that. But I do hope that you will comment some of your favorites and come back again next week for the next 3 films. Until then, go out there and have another nice mess. And we'll see you next time. So long.